My family decided I should sell my house to help my sister. I did something else and left everyone stunned. Hi everyone! Before we get into today's video, I need your help. We've noticed that the channel's reach has been dropping a bit, and one of the best ways you can support us is by subscribing. It's quick, free, and helps us keep bringing you new and interesting stories. Your support means the world to us, and together we can grow this channel. Thank you so much. Now let's get to today's story. I'm writing from a temporary account for obvious reasons, and I've changed some details to protect my anonymity. I never thought a single phone call could unravel 35 years of carefully constructed boundaries, but there I was, standing in my kitchen with my mother's voice drilling through my skull like a rusty nail. Sarah, you need to sell the house. No hello. No how are you. Just straight to the demand, as if my entire life was nothing more than an inconvenience to be rearranged at her whim. I set down my coffee mug with deliberate care, watching the steam curl up from the ceramic rim. The morning light filtered through the bay windows I'd saved 3 years to afford, casting golden rectangles across the hardwood floors I'd refinished with my own hands. Every corner of this house held pieces of me blood, sweat, tears, and dreams that had taken me 15 years to build. Good morning to you too, Mom, I said, my voice steady despite the earthquake beginning in my chest. Don't get smart with me. Emma needs help, and you have the means to provide it. Emma, my younger sister, the golden child who could do no wrong even when she was doing everything wrong. The same Emma who'd dropped out of college 3 times, who'd married a man everyone warned her about, who'd had 3 kids she couldn't afford with a husband who disappeared the moment child support papers arrived. What kind of help? I asked, though I already knew where this was heading. She's being evicted. The kids need stability. She needs a down payment for a proper house, somewhere safe. You sitting in that big house all by yourself while she's struggling? It's not right, Sarah. There it was, the guilt, served up like Sunday dinner with all the traditional fixings, family obligation, Christian duty, and the subtle implication that my success was somehow stolen from someone more deserving. I walked to the window and looked out at the garden I'd spent 4 summers creating. The roses were blooming deep red climbers that reminded me of my grandmother's house, back when family meant protection instead of predation. How much does she need? I asked. $200,000 should cover it. Down payment, moving costs, getting the kids settled. $200,000. The exact amount of equity I'd built in my home over the past decade. What a coincidence. Mom, that's my entire life savings wrapped up in this house. It's just money, Sarah. Emma has children. She needs it more than you need some fancy house. Just money, as if those weren't the most insulting words she could have chosen. As if I hadn't worked 70-hour weeks for years to escape the chaos and instability that had defined our childhood. As if I hadn't watched Emma make the same mistakes over and over while I sacrificed relationships, social life, and my own desires to build something solid and permanent. Have you talked to Emma about getting a job? About taking responsibility for... She's trying her best. Mom's voice cracked like a whip. She's a single mother with 3 children under 10. She can't just snap her fingers and fix everything like you did. Like I did. As if my success had been luck rather than the result of countless nights studying while Emma partied, countless dollars saved while Emma spent, countless careful decisions while Emma followed her heart wherever it led her. I didn't snap my fingers, Mom. I worked for 15 years. And now you can help your sister. That's what family does. I closed my eyes and pressed my forehead against the cool window glass. Outside, my neighbor Mrs. Chen was tending to her own garden, humming softly as she deadheaded her marigolds. She was 83 years old and had never asked me for anything except to water her plants when she visited her daughter in Seattle. I'll think about it, I said finally. Think about it? Sarah, she needs an answer by Friday or they're out on the street. Of course she did. There was always a deadline, always an emergency that required immediate sacrifice from everyone except Emma herself. I said I'll think about it. I hung up before she could respond. The silence in my house felt different afterward, tainted with the possibility of loss. I moved through my morning routine like a ghost, seeing everything with new eyes, the kitchen island where I'd learned to cook properly, the reading nook where I'd spent countless evenings rebuilding myself after the divorce. The guest room that had never housed a guest because I'd learned to be careful about who I let into my sanctuary. By noon, my phone was buzzing with texts. Emma, Mom told me she talked to you. Thank you so much for considering this. The kids and I are so grateful. Not even a question, already assuming my compliance. Dad, your mother's right. Family comes first. Emma needs help, and you're in a position to provide it. My brother Marcus, come on sis, it's just a house. Emma's got kids to think about. Just a house. The words echoed in my head like a taunt. By evening, the calls started. First Emma, crying about how scared the kids were, how little Sophia had been having nightmares about living in the car. Then my Aunt Linda, who'd apparently been recruited to the cause, explaining how disappointed Grandma would be if she knew I was letting families suffer when I had the means to help. I turned off my phone and poured myself a glass of the good wine, the bottle I'd been saving for when I finally paid off the mortgage in 3 years. The irony wasn't lost on me. That night I lay in bed staring at the ceiling and thinking about the last time I'd felt truly safe. It was the day I'd signed the papers on this house, when the realtor handed me the keys, and I'd sat alone in the empty living room, crying tears I hadn't even known I was holding. For the first time in my life, I belonged somewhere that no one could take away from me. The next morning brought a new assault. Mom appeared on my doorstep at 7 a.m. with coffee and croissants from my favorite bakery, as if carbohydrates could soften the blow of her emotional blackmail. I brought breakfast, she announced, pushing past me into the kitchen. Mom, I haven't even showered yet. Good, then you can't run away while we talk. She settled herself at my kitchen table as if she belonged there, arranging the pastries on one of my good plates. Everything about her presence felt like an invasion, a violation of the space I'd worked so hard to create. Emma called me last night, crying, she began without preamble. She's at the end of her rope, Sarah. Those children are not my responsibility, I finished quietly. Mom's face went through a series of expressions, shock, disappointment, and finally, the cold anger I remembered from childhood. How can you say that? They're your family. So am I. You're single. No children. You have options Emma doesn't have. There it was again. The implication that my life was worth less because I'd chosen differently. Because I'd prioritized stability over romance, career over children, security over the chaos of hearts and hormones that had defined Emma's choices. I made sacrifices for these options, Mom. I worked 2 jobs through college while Emma partied. I lived in a studio apartment eating ramen for dinner while she was planning elaborate weddings. I chose security while she chose adventure. Now I'm supposed to give up everything I've built because her adventures didn't work out? She was young. She was the same age I was when I started building this life. Mom set down her coffee cup with a sharp clink. You've become cold, Sarah. Hard. This house, maybe it's made you forget what matters. What matters is that I learned to take care of myself instead of expecting other people to clean up my mistakes. Mistakes? Mom's voice rose. You're calling her children mistakes? I'm calling her choices mistakes. There's a difference. She stood up abruptly, her chair scraping against the floor. I never thought I'd raised a daughter who could be so selfish. Selfish. The word hung in the air like smoke, acrid and choking. I'd been called selfish my entire life, for studying instead of babysitting Emma, for moving across the country for a better job, for not lending money that never got repaid, for setting boundaries that everyone else found inconvenient. Maybe you did, I said quietly. Maybe self-preservation looks selfish to people who've never had to fight for their own survival. She left without another word, the door slamming behind her with enough force to rattle the windows. Over the next 3 days, the pressure campaign intensified. Emma sent photos of the kids looking sad and displaced in their temporary shelter. Dad called with stories about how hard things had been for him and Mom lately, how much stress this was causing everyone. Marcus showed up at my office, causing a scene that had my colleagues whispering for the rest of the week. Just help her out, he pleaded in the elevator. You can always buy another house. Another house. As if houses were interchangeable, as if the years of memories embedded in these walls could be packaged up and moved like furniture. With what money, Marcus? If I sell this house to give Emma the down payment, I'll have nothing left. You're young. You'll rebuild. I stared at him. This brother who'd borrowed money from me countless times and never paid it back, who'd lived with our parents until he was 32, who'd never understood what it meant to build something from nothing. I'm 35, not 25, and I already built. This is what I built. But he was already shaking his head, already dismissing my concerns as drama, as selfishness, as another example of my inability to put family first. That night, I sat in my living room with a legal pad and a calculator, trying to figure out if there was any way to make this work. Could I take out a second mortgage? Could I downsize and still help Emma? Could I find some compromise that would satisfy everyone? But every scenario ended the same way. Me giving up my security for Emma's choices. Me sacrificing my stability for her crisis. Me becoming financially vulnerable so she could remain financially irresponsible. And in every scenario, I knew what would happen next. Emma would need help with the mortgage payments within 6 months. The kids would need school supplies, clothes, medical bills. There would be car repairs and utility bills, and 1,000 other emergencies that would somehow become my responsibility because I'd proven I was willing to solve her problems with my money. I'd become her personal ATM, and my family would applaud it as generosity while my own security crumbled around me. That's when the idea hit me. It was brilliant in its simplicity, terrifying in its completeness. A way to end this cycle once and for all, to protect myself and teach everyone else a lesson they'd never forget. I spent the next morning making phone calls, setting things in motion. By afternoon, I had everything I needed. Friday came with the weight of a funeral. I'd called a family meeting at my parents' house, telling everyone I'd made my decision about Emma's situation. They all gathered in the living room, where I'd spent so many childhood hours feeling small and wrong and not enough. Emma sat on the couch looking hopeful and desperate, her 3 kids playing quietly in the corner. Mom and Dad flanked her like bodyguards, ready to pressure me into compliance. Marcus lounged in Dad's recliner, already celebrating what he assumed would be my surrender. I stood in front of them all, holding a manila folder that contained the future theirs and mine. I've thought about Emma's situation, I began, my voice steady despite the hammering of my heart. About family obligations and who needs what and who deserves what. Emma leaned forward, tears already gathering in her eyes. Sarah, I can't tell you how much. I held up a hand to stop her. Let me finish. I opened the folder and pulled out the first set of papers. These are the financial records for the past 15 years. Every dollar I've earned, saved, and invested. Every sacrifice I made to build the life I have now. I set them on the coffee table where everyone could see the numbers. The years of $60,000 salaries, stretched to cover everything. The careful budgeting. The gradual increases in income that came from promotions earned through extra hours and additional responsibilities. Here's what I figured out, I continued. In the 15 years since we all became adults, I have loaned money to this family 17 times. The total amount comes to $47,000. The amount repaid comes to $0 and 0 cents. Marcus shifted uncomfortably. Dad cleared his throat. Sarah, that was family helping family. Let me finish, Dad. I pulled out the second set of papers. These are the records of every time someone in this family has helped me. Financial assistance, emotional support during my divorce, help moving, help with repairs, help with anything at all. I held up the blank pages. As you can see, the list is quite short. The room went quiet, except for the sound of Emma's youngest child humming while he played with his toy cars. Now, I continued, we come to the current request. Emma needs $200,000, and everyone believes I should provide it by selling my house because I'm single, childless, and therefore my security matters less than her emergency. Sarah, please, Emma's voice was whisper soft. But here's what I realized, I said, pulling out the final set of papers. Emma isn't the only one in this family who's made mistakes. Mom, Dad, you enabled her every bad decision. You bailed her out of every consequence. You taught her that someone else would always fix her problems. I turned to Marcus. And you've been just as financially irresponsible, just better at hiding it. 3 credit card bankruptcies, 2 car repossessions, and a foreclosure that Mom and Dad covered up by refinancing their own house. His face went white. So, here's my decision, I said, setting the papers back in the folder. I'm not selling my house. I'm not giving Emma $200,000. Instead, I'm doing something that will help everyone in this family learn about consequences and responsibility. I pulled out my phone and showed them the screen. This morning, I made a donation to the children's shelter in Emma's name. $50,000, money from my savings, not my house equity. It's enough to provide housing assistance for dozens of families who are working to improve their situations rather than expecting others to solve their problems. Emma's mouth fell open. You gave away $50,000 instead of helping us? I helped people who help themselves. The shelter has programs for job training, financial counseling, childcare assistance for working parents, people who want to build something instead of just having it handed to them. I looked around the room at the faces staring back at me. Shock, anger, disbelief, but also something else. Something that might have been respect, buried deep under the outrage. But that's not all, I continued. I also called my lawyer and set up a trust fund for Emma's children. It will pay for college tuition and expenses, but only if they maintain good grades and demonstrate financial responsibility. The money is theirs, but they'll have to earn it. Sarah, Dad started. I'm not finished. I also hired a financial advisor to meet with Emma next week. She'll help her create a budget, find resources for single mothers, and develop a plan for long-term stability. I'll pay for 6 months of sessions. Emma was crying now, but I couldn't tell if it was gratitude or fury. And finally, I said, I'm establishing boundaries. No more loans, no more bailouts, no more emergency phone calls demanding that I solve problems I didn't create. If anyone in this family wants my help in the future, they'll need to present a plan showing how they intend to help themselves. I closed the folder and held it against my chest like armor. You see, I realized something this week. You're all right that family should help family, but help means empowering people to succeed, not enabling them to fail. It means teaching people to fish, not giving them fish whenever they're too lazy to cast the line. The silence stretched out like a held breath. Then Emma exploded. How dare you? She screamed, jumping to her feet. How dare you sit there with your perfect little life and judge me? You don't know what it's like to be abandoned with 3 kids. You don't know what it's like to struggle. You're right, I said calmly. I don't know what it's like because I made different choices. You made selfish choices. I made responsible choices. There's a difference, though I understand why you wouldn't recognize it. Emma lunged toward me, but Marcus caught her arm. Sarah, that's enough. No, I said, meeting his eyes. It's not enough. It's never been enough. I've spent 35 years being the responsible one, the reliable one, the one who cleans up everyone else's messes. I've been called selfish for having boundaries, cold for having standards, and heartless for expecting adults to act like adults. I turned to my parents. You failed Emma by teaching her that consequences were optional. You failed Marcus by covering up his mistakes. And you failed me by expecting me to sacrifice my security for their choices. Mom's face was red with anger. You ungrateful? Ungrateful? I laughed, but it wasn't a happy sound. For what? For being raised to believe that my needs didn't matter? For learning that love was conditional on how much I was willing to sacrifice? For being taught that success was something to be ashamed of if other people didn't have it too? I walked to the front door, then turned back for one last look at the family that had never really felt like home. I'm grateful for one thing, I said. I'm grateful that I learned to build a life that doesn't require anyone else's approval or support. Because after today, I won't be asking for either. I left them there in their shock and their anger, their sense of entitlement and their wounded feelings. I drove home through the evening light, past the familiar neighborhoods that led to my street, my house, my sanctuary. As I pulled into my driveway, I felt something I hadn't experienced in weeks. Peace. My phone was already buzzing with angry texts and missed calls, but I turned it off and left it in the car. Tonight, I would sit in my garden with a glass of wine and watch the sunset paint my roses gold. Tomorrow, I would start planning the renovations I'd been putting off. Maybe a home office, maybe a greenhouse for year-round gardening. I had plans now. Dreams that didn't require anyone else's permission or approval. For the first time in my life, I was free to build something just for me, something that no one could guilt me into giving away. The house welcomed me home with familiar creaks and sighs, the sounds of a structure that had weathered storms and stood strong. Like me, it had been built to last. 3 months later, I received a letter from Emma. She'd gotten a job as a receptionist at a medical office and was working with the financial advisor to rebuild her credit. The kids were doing well in their new school, and she'd found a small apartment she could afford on her own. She didn't thank me for the trust fund or the financial counseling. She didn't apologize for the scene at Mom and Dad's house. But between the lines of her brief formal update, I could read something that might have been respect. Marcus had declared bankruptcy again and moved back in with our parents. They were all angry with me, but their anger felt distant now, like weather happening in another country. I was sitting in my garden when the letter arrived, enjoying the roses that were blooming bigger and brighter than ever. Mrs. Chen waved at me from her yard, and I waved back, both of us content in our separate, well-tended worlds. My phone rang, a number I didn't recognize. "Sarah, this is Jennifer Walsh from the Children's Shelter. We wanted to thank you again for your generous donation. It's made such a difference for the families we serve." "I'm glad to hear that," I said, watching a butterfly land on my prize rose bush. "Actually, I was calling to invite you to our volunteer orientation next week. We're always looking for people who understand the importance of empowering people to help themselves." I smiled, feeling something warm and light expanding in my chest. I'd like that very much. After I hung up, I sat in the golden afternoon light, surrounded by the life I'd built with my own hands and my own choices. For the first time in 35 years, I felt truly wealthy, not because of my house or my savings, but because I'd finally learned the difference between helping and enabling, between love and obligation, between family and home. The house that everyone else saw as just money, just property, just something to be liquidated for someone else's benefit. This house was my declaration of independence. It was proof that I could take care of myself, that I could build something beautiful and lasting, that I was worth the investment I'd made in my own future. And no one, not even family, would ever convince me to give that up again. The roses nodded in the evening breeze, and I knew they understood. Some things are worth protecting, even from the people who claim to love you, especially from them.